Dr. Myra Dow, is intricately interconnected system supporting tributaries of all sizes and form. People are dependent on Dr. Dow, and she shines. Thank you, Dr. Dow, for being our faculty sponsor and introducing our program guest.
Well, thank you, Margie and Carmaine, and thank you for those kind words. I am delighted to have this opportunity to introduce Michael. I think almost everyone knows him. He is someone who's very visible and very busy in the work that he does. And but I nevertheless want to have this chance to say just a few things before he gets started. I have known Michael through his participation as a Master of Library Science graduate student, a Kansas library director, an office holder in professional organizations, and as an active member of the Beta Epsilon chapter of Beta Phi Mu, and a member of the executive board, and as the director of the State Library of Kansas Talking Books Service. I still vividly recall Michael's completion of a reference guide assignment that he did in one course. The finished project was an easy to follow guide. It included useful, trustworthy sources of authority, which were likely to positively impact quality of life for individuals with autism and other pervasive developmental disorders and their communities. Michael's rare and wonderful abilities to contextualize life for individuals in high need of equity and inclusion is likely, I think, at least in part, helps to explain his outstanding leadership and tireless hard work in the Talking Book services. This past February, as you all have heard today and maybe already knew, Kansas Governor Laura Kelly extended her congratulations to the State Library of Kansas Talking Books Division to mark the 50th anniversary of free audio library services for the blind. She dedicated the week of March the 2nd as Talking Books Week. And today we have the privilege of benefiting from Michael's work during this special time. He's going to share with us about celebrating 50 years of Kansas Talking Books. Thank you so much, Michael, and welcome today.
All right, well, thank you. That was more of an introduction than I probably could have hoped for. So thank you very much, Dr. Dow. Good afternoon, everybody. As they have said, my name is Michael Lang. I am the director of the State Library of Kansas Talking Books Service. I am also the Beta Phi Mu Beta Epsilon chapter secretary. And 2020 marks the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the state's library services for the blind and print disabled. So today we're going to celebrate that history of Kansas Talking Books, look at the connection between the Kansas Library Association committee that helped establish this service as a division of the state library. And I want to introduce you to service improvements and innovations that are going to be rolling out here in the next few years. If you've got questions during it, ask them. We'll go whatever direction you want to go on this. I'm just happy to help you out if you have any questions or if any of my history reminds you of anything. But let's get started. One of the things I won't be talking about too much today is our patrons, which is really a shame because we do have some of the most, if not the most appreciative and thoughtful customers in the state, and they really are the highlight of this job. So before I get started, I wanted to share one of the many nice notes that we receive from patrons on a regular basis. This is from a lady in Fairway, Kansas, and she wrote to us that Talking Books, it is the most fantastic service available for the visually and physically disabled. Without it, I would be totally lost. And that's why we do what we do every day for the people that don't have access to information as easily or readily as many other people. So the Kansas Talking Books is a regional network library of the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled, NLS, which is a division of the Library of Congress. And every story has a beginning, and this is where ours starts, with the establishment of a library services to the blind on the national level. On March 3rd, 1931, President Herbert Hoover signed the Pratt-Smoot Act into law, mandating that embossed books be provided to adult blind residents of the US, and Congress appropriated $100,000 to the Library of Congress to be used for those services in that following fiscal year. So since 1931, was the establishment of a national service for Braille reading materials for adult blind patrons. In 1932, Smoot and Pratt were at it once again, this time proposing an amendment to the original law to include books in recorded format. In 1933, the American Federation for the Blind agreed to raise the funds for 1,200 initial phonograph machines, and then Congress agreed to appropriate money for the purchase of records for those phonograph machines. The Talking Book program was officially inaugurated in October of 1934. Over the years, other amendments to the Pratt-Smoot Act and other laws have been made to increase access to information for Americans with print disabilities. Some of the other important milestones include children becoming eligible for service in 1952 when the word adult is removed from the initial law. In 1962, the Library of Congress is authorized to collect and maintain musical scores and instructional texts for the use of the blind, laying the foundation for the NLS music section, which now has the largest collection of Braille music scores in the world, which can be borrowed for free by any talking book user across the country. In 1966, the service was opened up to people with physical impairments or low vision. NLS services were no longer just for the blind. Also in 1966, the Library Services and Construction Act was amended, which allowed for appropriations to states to establish or improve library services to the blind and physically handicapped. In 1996, the Chaffee Amendment was passed. This copyright law amendment provides that groups producing specialized formats for the blind no longer have to gain permission from the copyright holder to begin production. So if you're recording a book in a format specifically for print disabled persons, you don't have to get copyright approval to do that from the copyright holder. In 2016, the NLS was authorized to provide playback equipment in all formats, not just embossed or recorded formats, which opens the door to the possibility of distributing refreshable Braille displays and other as of yet imagined technologies. And then just last year, the Marrakesh Treaty was ratified by the US, which is an international agreement to facilitate access to published works for persons who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled. Basically, it allows for the free exchange of reading materials in specialized formats for the print disabled across international borders. It brings everybody's copyright laws in line with each other to allow for that free trade. Excuse me. With that general overview of the national service, let's examine how the process of establishing a talking book library played out in Kansas. Before I do that, though, I really have to thank Bill Sowers and his team at the State Library for their work on the Kansas Government Information, KGI, online library. If not for them, I don't think I would have very much information to present to all of you. So if you ever need historical documents from a state department or commission, start there, the KGI online library. Also, I learned that while they didn't have the information I was looking for, the Kansas Library Association archives are held at the Kansas Historical Society in Topeka, if you ever need them. So in Kansas, prior to the establishment of Talking Books, any statewide library services for the blind before 1940 fell under the umbrella of the Kansas State School for the Blind. In 1940, the State Department of Social Welfare reported that they had assumed the role of serving talking book readers in Kansas from the School for the Blind. Their division of services for the blind became the authorizing agency for applications in Kansas and maintained the local supply of talking book machines to lend to patrons. Braille and talking books were supplied, and reader records were maintained through a contract with Wolfner Library. At that point was in St. Louis, Missouri. It's now in Jefferson City. Though adults were still allowed to borrow books at least through 1950 from the Kansas State School for the Blind, and maybe beyond that, but that was the last mention I found of it in their biennial reports. So I'm going to read this part of a poem called Song of Appreciation. The talking book machine arrived, and I shall make it plain, I'll never want to be without that good machine again. By Dwight Barton of Lucas, Kansas. So the entirety of this poem, which if you need, I'll send it to you, or you can find it, because it was reprinted in the 1966 issue of Taproots, which is the newsletter of the Kansas Department of Social Welfare, and the author here espousing his joy of his talking book machine that he had received from the Division of Services for the Blind. And apparently he was well known to write in verse to the division, and they said that they held a library of his works back in 1966. I don't know if they still do. This is a picture of the A80 talking book machine. It is not the model that Mr. Barton was singing the praises of. This is a much later model, but it's a portable 3-speed record player. It would do 33 RPM, 16 RPM, and 8 RPM, which if you've never seen, if you're familiar with records and you see it going in 8 RPM, it really just looks like it's broken, but it sounds pretty great. This had a detachable lid speaker. And interesting trivia, the 33 1/3 speed that we all know and love for our LPs was actually developed first for talking book players. The record on there is a flexi disc record, which is made of lightweight flexible plastic, which are much cheaper to produce and harder to break in transit than the old style rigid discs. So here's the old rigid 10 inches. And here's how they shipped. By the end of the record era, everything was being shipped on flexible discs, especially for magazines, which were prohibitive in cost to produce on those rigid discs. So 1966 proved to be a pivotal year in regards to library services for the print disabled in Kansas. The service opens up to more than just blind readers, offering many more eligible patrons access to materials. And then the Library Services and Construction Act Amendment, Title 4B, authorized the appropriations to states establishing and improving library services to the physically handicapped, including blind and visually handicapped. The Kansas Library Association during these years was instrumental in studying the needs of Kansans with print disabilities, promoting library services available to the print disabled to public and school libraries, and developing the plan to establish the Regional Network Library as a division of the State Library of Kansas. Ruth Leak, I don't know if anybody knows Ruth, knew Ruth. I'm not sure if she's still with us, but after reading all about her, I'd really like to talk to her, of Great Bend Public Library and later the Central Kansas Library System. Seems to have been the driving force in the establishment of the regional library to better serve print disabled Kansans. In 1965 and 66, she begins raising awareness of the Talking Book service for the blind in her local newspaper and in the Kansas Library Bulletin. In 1966, the Kansas Library Association establishes the Research Committee on Library Services for the Blind, and Ruth Leak is appointed chairperson of the committee. I also need to mention Ernestine Gilliland was also very supportive of the committee as KLA president at that time. She at Hutchinson Public Library and Mrs. Leak at Great Bend also piloted deposit collections of talking books to circulate to local patrons during this time. Along with Mrs. Leak, the committee was made up of 9 other library representatives and representatives of organizations across the state who serve the blind. So the Department of Public Instruction, specifically the Special Education Division, the Department of Social Welfare, which houses the Division of Services for the Blind at that time, Wichita School Libraries, Rehabilitation Center for the Blind, Braille Association of Kansas, some Library of Congress certified Braillists, and the Kansas Lions Club were on that initial committee. Representatives were on that initial committee. Over the next 4 years, at least 15 different organizations would be represented on the committee as they work toward their goal of establishing a regional library in Kansas. Over the next 4 years, the committee kept themselves pretty busy. I'm going to take a drink real quick. Excuse me. In 1966, 66 is a very busy year around this on this topic. Ruth Leak visits the Wolfner Library in St. Louis to learn how the regional library functions and better understand how Kansas patrons are served. Also, the KLA Research Committee sends out a questionnaire to 310 Kansas libraries to determine the existing levels of service to the blind in Kansas and awareness of other available services. The responses showed a lack of current services and a general lack of knowledge of available services to the blind, but an overwhelming interest to learn more. And I really like this quote out of the article that I've footnoted there or endnoted. This is from Dorothy Richards of the Hayes Public Library, and she had responded with, "I'm sorry to be so negative, but at least I am perfectly candid." And so, I don't know, that made me laugh. With the feedback from those surveys, the committee compiled a bibliography of materials and sources for Braille, talking book records, tapes, and large print reading materials that they distributed to all public and school libraries in Kansas. Like I said, 1966 was a big year for them. In 1967, the committee started formulating their plan. The State Library and the Great Bend Public Library agreed to a contract to allow Ruth Leak to provide services to assist in the development of a plan for a regional library in Kansas under the newly amended LSCA. The committee's plan laid out the current state of services to the blind and print disabled in Kansas and included justifications for the establishment of a regional library in the state, which included the following points. Blind and handicapped persons are entitled to a service equal to that available of persons gifted with sight and unimpaired by other physical handicaps. With a regional library, a more direct service can be provided, which will give greater personal attention to the needs of the user. A state service has greater use, according to reports from officials of the Library of Congress. And a contractual service provided by another state cannot be as concerned with the needs of Kansans as it must be to the citizens of its home sponsoring state. With these justifications, they created their intermediate and long-range goals to ensure that all Kansans had equal access to reading materials. In 1968, the Kansas State Plan for the Library Services and Construction Act, Title 4B, was submitted to the U.S. Office of Education and approved. The state legislature denied funding authorization for the new division for fiscal year 1969 and fiscal year 1970. Basically, their concern was that once established, in the event of federal funding drop-off, the state would be forced to foot the bill for the entire service. So the committee and the state library representatives reconvened to review the proposal. One of the, I guess, most obvious points was that whether establishing the new division or not, the state was still supporting library services for the print disabled. The Division of Social Welfare's estimated contract for fiscal year 71 with Wolfner Library was going to be around a little over $41,000, which was more than an $18,000 increase since 1965's contract. While the cost to establish the new division would come to just over $25,000 and included matching funds of those $25,000 from the Library Services and Construction Act. After convening, the committee felt that the new division was a worthy cause, which they felt that from the beginning, but they still felt it was a good value, and they again submitted the proposed plan for fiscal year 1971, funding for which was authorized for disbursement in July of 1970. Woohoo! In a letter to Robert Bray of the Library of Congress's Division of Services to the Blind, written on September 28, 1970, State Librarian Denny Stevens wrote, "We continue to be grateful to Ruth Leak, who is largely responsible for the services soon to be made available to Kansans." I do not know Ruth, but I will echo his comments and give my heartfelt thanks to Mrs. Leak, to Mrs. Gilliland, and all the others who worked on the committee, who worked at the state library, that worked so hard to make this service possible and increase access for everybody in the state. And their hard work paid off, because in 1970, the Kansas Library Services for the Blind and Physically Handicapped was established as a division of the State Library of Kansas. Now, this is where I need like confetti cannons and stuff that sprays out, something that would really get KLA's cleaning deposit, taken away, but I can't do that. So that's a bummer. If only we had been on site. Jim Hahn might have said it best when he visited Kansas for planning and preparation of the implementing the new service. He said, "We're not asking you to do anything you shouldn't already be doing." The picture on the right shows the original shelving units at 801 Harrison Street, with talking books on record in their cases, ready to be mailed out. Oops. All right. On July 15th, 1970, Ellen Zabel became the first director of the Kansas Library Services for the Blind and Physically Handicapped. She would spend the next 2 years traveling the state, educating librarians about the service, and traveling to other states to explain how we did things. She established the sub-regional service model that would continue for nearly 40 years. On August 5th, the first shipment of NLS materials was slated for delivery, and according to a letter from Mr. Honda State Librarian Denny Stevens, the initial delivery would consist of 7,000 containers of records, of 3,000 titles, 100 open reel tapes, 150 cassettes, 32 cassette machines, and this is the quote, "as many talking book machines as you wish." So those would have been record players. They must have had plenty of record players by 1970. This is not the model of cassette player that they would have received. This is the C1 model, which was developed in the 80s. This is what, until recently, we were still sending out, but they played 4-track cassettes, featured variable speed control and tone adjustment controls. to help meet the needs of our readers. Since 1970, there have been 9 directors of the Kansas Talking Books Division. 2 of those, Ellen Zabel and Carolyn Longmore, actually continued their careers at NLS after leaving Kansas. And I was trying to track down Ellen Zabel, who was later Ellen Hahn's kind of trajectory. At one point, it looked like she was the chief of the Reading Rooms Division at the Library of Congress. And I just didn't have the resources to keep going on that, but I think she continued to move her way up through the Library of Congress. So in the picture here on the very far right is Tony Harrell, former director, at a signing of a 2008 Talking Books Week proclamation with Governor Kathleen Sebelius and members of Talking Books Advisory Council and Talking Books patrons as well. On October 15th, 1970, the first sub-regional library opened to patrons in Manhattan. Over the next 4 months, 5 more sub-regionals were established in Hayes, Hutchinson, Dodge City, Kansas City, and Wichita. They provided direct service to Talking Book patrons in their service areas, with administrative and material support provided by the regional library in Topeka. Over the years, things change, things shift. Sub-regionals were also located in Great Bend, Topeka, and Norton. Once established, the justifications of the KLA Research Committee's plan were quickly realized. In 1965, there were 1,972 readers served by Wolfner Library through their contract. By 1975, just 5 years after the establishment of the division, more than 4,000 readers were served by the Kansas regional and sub-regional libraries. To preface this one, I'm going to admit that this is the rabbit hole I fell down during my research. I found it super interesting, discovered a fascinating family connection as well. So please bear with me on this. It might be a little bit more information than you needed. But first housed at 801 Harrison Street in Topeka, the library was forced to relocate in 1975 to 529 Kansas Avenue. By the early 80s, another move was imminent as office space was to be renovated for use by another state agency. After reading a report of a 1981 symposium hosted by ALA and NLS on educating librarians to provide services to the blind and physically handicapped, Director Carolyn Longmore began working with the Slim Dean Robert Grover on a proposal to move the Kansas Talking Books Regional Library to the campus of Emporia State University. In some correspondence, their stated goal was to maintain physical proximity to the Graduate School of Library and Information Management in order to support and encourage the education of librarians for service to the blind and physically handicapped. This plan included just general exposure to the existence of the program, as well as volunteer and employment opportunities for SLIM graduate students that still continue today. The move took place during the week of July 11th through the 15th, 1983, and was a cooperative effort between multiple state agencies. On the 11th through the 13th, that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of that week, the Kansas National Guard supplied 2 semi-trucks and 4 drivers to transport materials from Topeka to Emporia. At this time, my grandfather was a colonel in the Kansas National Guard, and I found his name listed on multiple documents, even a few papers from the desk of Colonel Carr, and that was really interesting to see. I actually went and talked to him last weekend to see what he remembered about the move. He vaguely recalled it. I think it was mostly papers that crossed his desk at that point, but it was a connection that I wasn't anticipating and that really surprised me. On those days as well, those 3 days, the State Department of Corrections supplied 15 men plus guards from Topeka to load the trucks, and 15 different men plus guards from the El Dorado and Toronto honor camps to unload in Emporia. Also, and this is what my staff is really impressed with, lunch was donated on Monday by Pizza Hut and on Tuesday and Wednesday by McDonald's. So we've talked about moving again to see if we can get free lunch, but I'm not sure some personal pan pizzas will be worth it. But due to this level of interagency cooperation, Longmore estimated the cost of the actual move was somewhere around $50. Kansas Talking Books remains the first and only talking book library located on a university campus. Now we're going to jump ahead quite a few years. In 2005, our advisory council purchased a recording studio with funds provided by an anonymous donor. Dedication was held on October 5th, 2005. The booth was named in honor of Jerry Kopp, who was a founding member of the Talking Books Advisory Council. So it is the Gerald Kopp Recording Studio. Since then, we have recorded and produced almost 1,000 books, focusing on Kansas notable books, William Allen White Award nominees, other Kansas interest books, and books for children. We currently record and distribute 4 magazines and 1 newsletter to our patrons as well. There's a photo of Steve reading in the, would have been brand new recording booth at that point, I believe. By 2009, the transition from cassette to digital talking book had been in the planning process for quite a few years, but we received our first shipments of digital talking book players and digital talking book cartridges in the fall of 2009. There's a lot of advantages to the cartridge system over records or cassettes for libraries. It really reduces the space needed to store materials. So on one of those cartridges that you can see, the white cartridge sitting down there by the machine on the bottom, the entire King James version of the Bible is available on one cartridge. Where in the past it would have been distributed on 14 4-track cassette tapes or 68 16 RPM records in 5 containers. I was going to tell you about more of the benefits, but this morning while shaving, I remembered this video that was produced during the transition that explained it to patrons. So I'm going to show you this video. I think I got the box clicked to share my audio. So, oh, is it going to let me share that though?
Michael, you don't have any questions, but just lots of kudos, amazing connections with your family. Wonderful that you could talk with him. And Roger just says, I was at the ESU campus finishing my MLS at the time of the move, but I don't remember anything about that happening.
Oh, well, it sounded like it was a pretty quick setup. All right. Can you see my YouTube video now?
Yes, we can.
All right.
Hi, I'm a talking books player.
Really? So am I.
Are you sure? You're kind of little, almost like a little kid.
Small but mighty would be my nickname. Only 2.5 pounds, but pure ease and enjoyment.
So where does your cassette go? You know, I can offer a book on just 3 tapes. My users love that.
Really? I don't even use cassettes. I have a cartridge, and it can hold an entire book on just 1 cartridge. They never even have to flip it over to continue it.
Well, readers have been loving my navigation features for years.
Well, sure. I have the same navigation features, but my buttons have memory as well.
Memory? What does that mean?
Well, that means I can remember where my reader is in the book, even if it's taken out and replaced with a second book. And I have a nice nighty-night button for those who like to listen in bed.
So, I bet you can't run as long as I can. 6 hours. Beat that.
What? Are you kidding me? My battery lasts 30 hours. And when I get tired, it only takes 1 hour to recharge.
I have 70,000 titles available to my users. Anything they may want to read.
So what? I have 20,000 titles available right now, but my savvy users can download anything they want from Bookshare or others, plus MP3 files, and they can play music too. Soon, we'll be adding special collections for the blind and the dyslexic as well.
Interesting. I have a fabulous group of readers advisors and talking book librarians who will drop a book in the mail whenever my reader calls.
Well, I have that same incredible group at the subregionals catering to the needs of my readers. And yes, it's all free of charge.
Humph.
Oh, I like that ending. That's a way to end it.
You got many comments of the gloves are a nice
I
touch.
know. I gotta stop this. Stop video. Change back to the, where was I? I was at Digital Talking Books.
Eric says that was great.
It was
And
great.
Roger wants you to know that he got engaged the same month that the move was happening. So that
Well,
he might have been a little distracted.
I mentioned at one of our staff meetings that one of the letters from my grandpa was 2 days after I was born, where then a number of the members of the staff kind of scoffed and rolled their eyes at the fact that I was born in 1983. So the digital talking book machine and cartridges are still going strong more than a decade later, now offering over 100,000 titles available for listening. NLS had been providing electronic Braille files for patrons to download from a website since 2001, a service called Web Braille. But as NLS developed the talking books, they also developed and modified the early Web Braille service for the digital talking books. So the Braille and audio reading download service, BARD, was introduced along the same timeline as the rollout of the digital talking books. In 2013, a mobile app for iOS was released, and in 2015, a mobile app for Android was released. In 2014, the Kansas notable book, The Blue Shoe by Rod Townley, was the first Kansas-produced talking book approved and posted to BARD. Since then, Kansas Talking Books has loaded 460 books to BARD, books which are available with the click of a button to any NLS user across the country. 2010 saw the beginning of a major restructuring of the Talking Book Library organization, the libraries organization, during which the remaining sub-regional libraries were closed or transitioned to outreach and advisory centers. So machine and book collections were consolidated at the regional library in Emporia, and the regional library continues direct service to patrons statewide today. But contracts with 4 of the regional library systems remain in place for advisory and outreach services. So I want to thank you for all of your hard work, Mary, Kathy, Richard, and Wanda, and everybody who came before you in those positions to help us reach people in your areas. It's a big state, and all the help we can get is appreciated. And 10 years after the introduction of digital talking books to Kansas, we finally phased out our cassette services. But the cases still make a pretty tree in the winter for us to set up. So over half a century, we've gone from distributing records and record players to offering downloadable audio and Braille directly to mobile devices. Last year, we served nearly 5,000 patrons across the state and circulating over 160,000 books, magazines, videos, and players. New innovations are currently in development that will once again redefine our service model, but not our mission, to provide accessible reading materials to Kansans with print disabilities. And I want to highlight the three big initiatives that will be coming up here in the next probably just 1 to 2 years. We're very excited about the initiative to redefine who can legally certify individuals with a reading disability. Currently, only medical doctors or doctors of osteopathy can certify reading disabilities. By bringing the certifying authority requirements in line with other qualifying print disabilities, we'll have the opportunity to increase the ease of access for many, especially younger patrons with diagnosed reading disabilities who have had to overcome an additional barrier to receive access to our services. Eliminating barriers to services. We hope that this will go into effect by the beginning of next calendar year, but does require an amendment to current statute. So fingers crossed on that. I keep trying to move my paper when I need to move my slide. In the first quarter of next year, we at Kansas Talking Books are scheduled to receive new equipment that's going to enable us to undertake a dramatic change to our circulation model. This download on demand circulation system is the key for patrons to unlock the entire NLS digital talking book collection. In clinical terms, download on demand is an automated process to load multiple talking books onto a single cartridge. Snooze fest, boring. If you want a visual of that, download on demand will allow us to send the books in these 30 blue cases, the same amount of books in those 3 opaque cases on the right. That's a lot of mail saving, a lot of space saved on somebody's nightstand and in their mailbox. Here's a look at the Gutenberg duplication workstation that's going to make all of this possible. I believe this is from Colorado's workstation. It consists of a server that basically holds all of BARD. It holds the entire NLS collection that updates nightly. The dedicated workstation contains this toaster rack, which you can see consists of four racks of 5 cartridges together that can duplicate 20 orders at a time. So hopefully by this time next year, we're going to be up and running smoothly with this new system. Because simply put, download on demand means more of the books our users want faster. No more waiting for new books to be delivered and processed. No more waiting on books to be returned by other users. No more lost books in the middle of a series. Talking Book users will have access to every title at all times, which as a library user is the ultimate dream. And then the third initiative is the refreshable Braille display Braille e-reader pilot that NLS launched this summer. They're testing out 2 e-reader devices, which are really just pared down refreshable Braille displays. There's a picture of the one that Kentucky Talking Books is testing out right now, sitting on top of a Braille book. The purpose of the pilot is to test the functionality of the e-reader, collect feedback from patrons, and then also validate the distribution process at the libraries, because the goal is for NLS network libraries like us to be able to distribute these devices as we do the current Talking Book machines for free to our patrons, making Braille reading much more accessible, much more affordable and portable for the users.
Just a couple comments. That's amazing. Congratulations. And here's to inclusion and breaking down barriers.
It'll be awesome. When we haven't got to hold it here yet, but we're really excited. A person on our advisory committee also works in Iowa, and she has said that Iowa, the users there are really, really loving theirs. So this is the end. Thank you all for your time today. Thank you for your constant and continued support of the Kansas Talking Books. The words of Ruth Leak from 1966 still remain true more than 50 years later. The key to wider use lies in reaching, informing, and encouraging those citizens for whom the program is planned. And we rely on librarians like you to help spread the word about the program in your communities, in your schools, to help identify potential patrons, certify those applications as you can and as you see fit. So I just thank you for everything that you do to support us and to support your patrons. If you ever have questions or need to contact us, please feel free to call or email. We usually are always like, please come visit. I don't know if right now is the perfect time to come visit, but if you ever want to visit, especially when we get this new system up and running, we will welcome you with open arms once everything cools down a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen because all I've got is EndNotes for you to, the document is in the folder. So if you'd like to chase down those EndNotes in KGI, go for it. But I'm going to stop sharing now. And if there's any questions or anything.
Yeah, you have a question in chat. What is the size of your staff and do you have volunteers?
Yes, so our recording is mostly done by volunteers, the actual reading of materials. Right now, that's not happening. Right now, our booth is as a contained space with minimal ventilation, with an activity that really kind of encourages you to spit a lot as you do it, reading out loud. It's not necessarily the place we want people, but for the most part, our books are recorded by volunteer narrators. Our staff consists of 4 readers advisors, basically patron services, that also help with the local recording, outreach, and some of the cataloging. And then we have currently 3 circulation staff and a slim graduate assistant that is helping us with that because we one of our staff got married and left recently, so she's helping us fill in because we're quarantining mail, so our daily processes have changed. So a part-time person is helping with that, and she helps with local recording too. And then there's me, who researches stuff for like 3 weeks.
That's great information though. Just
Fine.
a couple comments. This is a great program. Thank you so much. I hope you will publish all these details. That's a great idea. We are so proud of this Kansas service and your leadership, Michael, in bringing about technological and personal advancements. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, thank you. And I do want to encourage everybody, Kansas Government Information Online Library. If you are ever looking for something that happened in Kansas history, in the 50s through the 70s, that Kansas Library bulletins are all digitized there. And even then in the 80s, the newsletters, the Kansas Library newsletter is all digital and online there. There's so much stuff there. It's really cool.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It was a very interesting afternoon. I really appreciate you taking the time and presenting that. This is going to be a great presentation, a historical presentation. For those that didn't get to see it, I'm going to encourage everybody to take the time to listen to it. So at this time, I guess if there's not anything else, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.